So welcome for round two, and thank you for coming back for this. This is another big night for us. I would like to reminder who I am. I'm Tom Hickman. I'm the CEO for the district. But we have some other pretty important people here tonight. We have our board chair here, Commissioner Sanders. Hello, everybody. Our vice chair, Commissioner Duggan, and our other commissioner, Commissioner Doan. So this is important, and what we're going to be talking about tonight, kind of the next step in this. And we have a special guest speaker tonight. I'm going to give him a really cheap, cheesy plug. He wrote this book with other folks, but Manny Theodora is here, and he's going to talk to us what the kind of research he's done around affordability, what he knows about our district in terms of affordability tonight. I'm going to let Jason do the rest of the introduction, but if you want a interesting, good book to read, here you go.
Minutes to do introductions. Jenna, can you lead the introductions for the virtual?
Absolutely, happy to. On the virtual forum, we have Tracy Steele, we have Frank Reed, we have June Boone, and then from TVWD and the consultant side, we have staff monitoring and making sure we can archive this meeting for you all.
Thank you. And then my name is Lily Baki, and I'm honored to be your facilitator for these meetings. And with me is, introduce yourself.
Katie Wilson, supporting me tonight.
My co-worker. And then we'll start. Paul, do you want to?
Sure. I'm Paul Matthews, the Chief Financial Officer for the Tualatin Valley Water District.
Jason?
Jason Blum. I'm a consultant for the district.
And Manny, I know you're going to get a more formal introduction, but.
I am Manny Teodoro. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin.
Thank you. And Andrea?
Andrea Watson, Communications and Public Affairs Supervisor.
Okay, and then we'll just go around the table. And Patty, do you want to say where who you're representing for the committee?
Yeah, so Maddie Hyde and I guess the Tigard area.
Okay, thank you. Well, because you're eating, I'm going to call on you right at this point.
Of course you would.
Yeah.
Chris Brown, I am the Aloha, right around the district. I'm 5 blocks over and 4 blocks up from this office, so.
Wow, look,
Very
you're a
good.
neighbor, you're also a neighbor.
Yes.
Yep.
Jim Duggan, TVW Commissioner. John Seychelles, I'm also representing the Aloha business area.
Yeah, and I talked to you a bit today. You also work for Portland. You're
Environmental Services.
the sewer department, so nice to use some utility
A
background.
little bit here and there.
Yeah, a little bit in there.
Daryl Monolong, I guess it'd be the north area of Bethany area.
Okay, thank you.
Zach Manoa with the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, Government Affairs, representing some of the key stakeholders.
You.
Kyle Walker, I'm a customer up on Body Slope.
Steve Marks, customer in unincorporated Washington County, Cedar Mill area.
I'm Todd Spade with Washington County Community Action.
Samantha Rico, North Beaverton, unincorporated Washington County.
Todd Sanders, TWD Commissioner.
I am Jessie Dillon. I'm a customer, Cedar Mill area.
Thank you very much. Tonight, the agenda, we'll go over a few administrative details, and then we'll jump right into Dr. Teodoro's presentation about affordability, followed by Jason Lum, who's going to talk about what all that means to TVWD and to the RAC work assignment. So we want to make sure that you ask questions. Manny is here, and I'm sure it's okay with him you stop him and ask him questions and to get more insights or learn more about what he's presenting. And then tonight also, at the end of the evening and after our discussion, we will have our first opportunity to take a formal vote on a recommendation, which is, actually, I think we changed this a bit when we get to the slide, but does TVWD have an issue and should they explore options for expanded customer service program? So it's just as this group is acknowledging that it is good for TVWD to look into this, and that launches us into a deeper discussion about what assistance programs may look like. Jenna, is everybody set online, or should I go through the instructions for online?
I believe all of our access needs are met. Just gonna let everyone know if they'd like to turn on closed captioning or turn it off, to use the 3 dots that say more next to your camera button and select turn on or turn off live captions, and it may help you follow the meeting.
Thank you. So again, the assignment is to consider approaches to address affordability of water service for financially vulnerable TVWD customers. We have a series of meetings. Today we are at meeting 2, which is part 1 of the customer assistance program. We actually extended it into 3 meetings because I think the data that you will hear tonight from Dr. Teodora and Jason's presentation, you'll see that 1 more meeting probably isn't enough to really dive into this information and make recommendations about assistance programs. And also, we prepared a meeting summary from meeting number 1 and posted it on the website. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to review it, but if you have or you feel comfortable approving them, then we can take the draft off of those meeting minutes and repost them on the website. So I was going to do an informal call for approval of minutes. If you all feel comfortable with that. Everybody, we try it. Everybody who approves the summary from meeting number 1. I see. Okay, it looks like, and you had it?
I haven't reviewed them.
You haven't reviewed them. Okay, so informally, and then we will send you an email when the summary from this meeting is posted, and make sure that you have time to review them so we can approve them at the start of every meeting. And with that, Jason, I'm turning it over to you.
That's great. I'm going to use the podium for a moment. All right. I wanted to get this opportunity to do this introduction because it's not very often that you get a chance to introduce somebody for whom you hold in personal esteem, as I do, Dr. Teodoro, who's going to come up here next. I'll just give you a few tidbits from his extensive CV, but not all of it because it is extensive. Not only is he the author of the book that Tom was showing you earlier, he's the author of 2 books. I counted on the CV also, Manny, correct me if I'm wrong, 25 peer-reviewed articles. Is that right?
Sounds about right.
That's what's on there.
Yeah.
He's an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin, the Robert M. La Follette School of Public Affairs. And between all of his time commitments, being full-time on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin, spending some of his time on consulting engagements like he is with us tonight, he also spends a very significant amount of his time volunteering in various roles and responsibilities in the water industry nationally with the American Water Works Association and other organizations. And this is how I know Manny, because we share that particular parts of our career. Manny spends a lot of his time working on matters of affordability of water services for people in this country. He has led the thinking on how we measure it and what to do about it for many years. And I would say of all the people that I know in the water industry, if I had a question about what does affordability mean and how are we addressing it in this country, not just from a measurement perspective, but from a policy perspective. I could think of nobody I would rather have here tonight to talk to you about those topics than Dr. Teodoro. So without blowing him up even further than I already have, I'd like to bring him up here so he can share with you some of the work that we had him do for your benefit. So that as you go about considering these policy considerations for TVWD, that you will have the benefit of his wisdom in your thinking. And I'll be back afterwards to try to put it in perspective for you too.
Thanks, Jason. That's very, very kind. You know, one of the things that Jason didn't mention is I actually got my start in the water sector working for the same firm that Jason now works for many years ago. I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest up in Seattle. Got my start in the water sector with FCSG, and one of the very last projects that I worked on back in the 1990s before I decided to stop working for a living and become a professor instead, was this wacky idea of developing a water supply from the Willamette River. The very last thing I did was work on costing that out. And I remember at that time thinking, Tualatin Valley Water District, why did they want in on this project? They got plenty of water. And then it's years and years and years out that they're talking about using this supply. Well, I guess you stick around long enough and now we're years out. So we're in a situation where you're dealing with new supply issues. It's really delightful to be with you. And I want to first of all, just acknowledge that spending an evening thinking about water rates, you know, that's not what a lot of people would do for fun. So I want to recognize and appreciate folks who are spending their time, because informing this process is so important. The kind of information that utility staff get from, and usually elected officials get from this kind of group is so important. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's important and that you're doing that work for us here. Anything that I can do to help frame and think about the affordability issues, I'm happy to do, because this stuff's hard. You know, intuitively, affordability seems pretty straightforward. Something's expensive. People struggle to pay for it. But then it turns out it's actually, once you start, like most complicated things, when you start peeling it back, things look more complicated. And the way you address these things is complicated. It's not easy at all. So what I'm going to do, I've got a little bit of a song and dance for you to get through. But as Libby indicated, please do stop me if you've got questions along the way. I'm going to be going kind of fast. My students tell me that the lectures are sometimes drinking from a fire hose. So flag me down if I'm going too fast, if you want me to stop and talk about something, if you've got a question along the way that's clarifying, particularly that's useful. And then hopefully, if I do this right, we'll have plenty of time at the end of my prepared remarks to talk about stuff, to address questions, talk about bigger issues. All right, so here's where we're going. Let's talk about what affordability is. It's a deceptively complicated thing. And then I'll talk about how we measure water affordability. And then I'll show you some metrics that I worked up for TVWD, both the current picture of affordability and a projection of what affordability will look like over the next few years, based on what we think will happen. And then we'll talk about this tricky question of thresholds and some policy strategies, how utilities, utilities don't run the macro economy, but how a utility like TVWD can address affordability problems for their customers. So let's start with this question of what affordability, what exactly it is. Well, naturally, our minds, when we think about affordability, our minds naturally go to the prices of things, and that's important, but it's only the start of thinking about affordability. And to get what I mean, I want to start with affordability of well, something kind of silly, like a boat. So I moved to Wisconsin about 2 years ago, and I live about a quarter mile from Lake Monona. I don't know if anybody here knows Madison, Wisconsin, but it's between a couple of big lakes. I live very close to Lake Monona. Most of my neighbors have boats. I feel a little left out sometimes because I don't own a boat. But I think about things like a boat. So this boat, I looked it up. And by the way, it turns out when you look at catalog pictures of boats on the water, they almost always feature young women in swimsuits. That's just what they do. In any case, this boat sells for about $45,000. So if I ask myself, if I might ask myself, if I'm jealous of my neighbor's boats, can I afford a boat? Well, the $45,000, if you finance that, that works out to something like $750 a month in boat payments. You figure some fuel, some insurance, mortgage, all of the other things that go along with owning a boat. You top that all up, and you're looking at probably something like $1,000 or $1,100 a month that it's going to cost me to own this boat. Can I afford that boat? Well, I look at my income. My income's over $1,000, so I guess I can afford the boat, right? It cost me $1,000 to keep the boat. I make more than $1,000. Then, and at some level, I can afford the boat. But of course, the boat's not the only thing I need. The boat's not the only thing I need. If I have an extra $1,000 after I've paid for all of the other stuff, I need to do things like pay for food, for my housing, for my energy. I have a child in college. You know, I have to pay for these sorts of things too. And then maybe after I pay for all those things, maybe the boat, that I don't have the extra $1,000 left for the boat. So the main thing is that with the water bill, when we think about water bills and affordability, what we really care about is not so much the price of water, but the kinds of trade-offs that it forces. So if my water bill is high and the consequence is I can't buy a boat, that's really not a public policy problem. If I can't buy food, now maybe we've got a public policy problem. So affordability really is about trade-offs. It's not about the price of something. It's about the price of something relative to the resources available to pay for it. If our family here can't afford to buy a pleasure boat, well, we don't really care. But if they can't afford housing, home energy, food, medicine, that becomes a public policy problem then. I'm imposing a little bit of a normative ethical claim here, but I don't think it's a very controversial one. I think most of us, that's what we worry about when we think about affordability is what kinds of trade-offs are we forcing on people when the price of something as essential as water service goes up. So now we know what affordability is. It's about trade-offs. Let's keep that in mind. It's about trade-offs. We have to ask ourselves, how do we measure that? How do we get after that trade-off? How do we know when the trade-offs are unacceptable, when they pass the point where we think they're okay? We want to measure affordability, and we want to measure it for several reasons. We want to measure affordability in part because we want to understand if we have a problem, how significant that problem is, and then if we need to set our policies to address the problem, and then we need to know if we're improving things. So we have to measure. There's that old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. So we want to measure affordability carefully. And there are several ways to measure affordability. I've spent a lot of my last 10 to 15 years of my career working on different ways to measure affordability, and I've arrived at a couple of measures that I think are pretty useful. They're not the only ones out there. There are other people peddling other forms of measurement. Some are good, some are not so good. But here's what I'm going to talk about. I've got this sort of two-part, it's not sort of, I have a two-part way of measuring affordability that I'm going to share with you tonight. One is called the affordability ratio, and the other is hours at minimum wage. You get after these two things, they're complementary metrics. You get after these two things, and they give you a pretty good idea of affordability of water services at the household level. I want to emphasize that this is a metric that's intended to measure household level affordability. And I bring that up because sometimes when you're reading about affordability in the water sector, if you just like to Google affordability, water utilities, you'll see sometimes people talk about affordability at the system level, which is really a misnomer. What they're talking about is a financial capability. They're asking questions like, can TVWD afford to build, I don't know, a new reservoir? That's a different kind of question. That's not what we're asking here. What we're asking here is, can individual customers afford their bills? We're talking about a household level, customer level phenomenon. All right, so let's get after talk about what these two are. I'm going to go in, I'm not going to go into gross detail. If you want to see all the gory details and the methodological and theoretical justifications for all this stuff, there's a pair of articles in journal AWWA and AWWA Water Science. These things are available for free from my website. If you're an AWWA member, you can get them there. If you want all the gory methodological detail, it's there. I'm going to keep things at a very high level to keep us moving tonight, but that's where you're going to find the methods and the data. Actually, there's 3 articles. Okay, let's start with the affordability ratio. Excuse me. The affordability ratio is just the cost of basic water and sewer. It's the price of basic water and sewer service as a percentage of disposable, or you can think of discretionary income. Mathematically, this is what it looks like. We look at the price of basic per capita water and sewer service, and we multiply by the household size. I want to, because this is a water district, we're going to focus on water, but we're also at some points going to be looking at water and sewer together because most customers are paying for both. So we'll be looking at both of those. So it's the cost of basic per capita water and sewer service multiplied by the household size divided by that household's income minus other essential expenditures. Other expenses that they can't avoid that are at least in the same conversation as water in terms of things that we need to have, things that are essential. Now you can calculate this number for any household. We're going to assume for purposes of the calculations today that basic water service is 50 gallons per capita per day. Now, that's an important number to keep in mind because 50 gallons per capita per day is roughly what Americans use for indoor essential purposes, things like drinking, cooking, cleaning, flushing the toilet. Yes.
So per capita, that the translation of that is per person?
Yes, per person.
Okay.
So for a household with 2 people, that would be 100 gallons a day. For 3, it would be 150 gallons a day, so on. So yeah, 50 gallons per capita per day. And then we multiply that by the household size. And again, you can do this for any individual household. If you've got the data for any individual household, you can calculate this number for any individual household. Now, because we're interested in low income affordability, we're going to look at the 20th income percentile. In all but the most desperately poor communities in this country, the median or the average household does not have an affordability problem. Water service, sewer service, even as prices go up, is still a remarkable value, and most people have no problem paying their monthly bills. Low-income households, however, can struggle paying their monthly bills. So we're going to focus our analysis on the 20th percentile. Why the 20th percentile? Well, traditionally in welfare economics, 20th percentile is the cutoff. It's the bottom of the middle class. So we think of the middle class as 20th to 80th percentile of income. This is the low end of the middle class, folks you might think of sort of working class families. The reason that 20th percentile ends up being a very useful benchmark in a lot of welfare economics is that at that level, people can really struggle month to month making ends meet, but probably make too much money to qualify for much in the way of public assistance. So these are people who do not get a whole lot of assistance from government assistance programs generally, but might still not have a whole lot of resources left over at the end of the month after they pay things. So it ends up being a really important benchmark for a lot of things we study. That's what we're going to study, target our analysis. Now we can, the other metric is hours at minimum wage, and that's very simple. It's just the hours of labor at minimum wage that are required to pay for basic monthly service. And again, it's that same numerator, the basic per capita water and sewer service, 50 gallons per person per day, divided by the average, not the average, the local minimum wage. Now, this is not as sensitive a metric. The AR20 is a very nice, sophisticated metric, but it's also very abstract. It can be complicated to calculate this thing for a large group, for a large area, large diverse area especially. This is a wonderfully intuitive metric, this hours at minimum wage. And it means something. If you've ever had to work at minimum wage, goodness knows I have, this number means something. I think it communicates powerfully. The other thing that it makes hours at minimum wage a useful metric is it's a useful analytical backstop in places that are relatively affluent. And that's actually going to come up and be relevant in our analysis in a little bit, because this is actually an area that is relatively affluent. The service area is relatively affluent. So this metric can end up being a really nice complement. All right, so those are the metrics we're going to use. Allow me to lay some data upon you. I have calculated these metrics for the Tualatin Valley Water District service area, both under current conditions and then projected metrics looking forward. Here's what I did. So I'm going to go really quickly through some of the assumptions that went into this analysis. I'm going to calculate the AR20 numbers and the hours of minimum wage for both a 3-person and a 4-person household that work out to 4,500 gallons a month or 6,000 gallons a month that equate to about 6 CCF or 8 CCF a month. Those are going to be the levels at which we're going to evaluate affordability. Now, I want to take just a minute to talk about why those numbers. At some level, of course, you can arbitrarily choose any volume and benchmark volume that you like. There's nothing magic about these numbers. I know that a lot of the numbers that you've been seeing feature 7 CCF because that's sort of an average or a typical bill. Well, the average household size in the service area is about 2.6. That equates to something like 67 gallons per person per day, which is significantly higher than the 50 gallons per person per day. That's because a lot of the water use that happens in the average customer's, a lot of the average customer's water use is not essential. It's for outdoor irrigation, or it's for car washing. It's doing other things that are not essential use. So as a matter of public policy, we don't necessarily want to measure the affordability of washing your car in the driveway or irrigating your lawn. What we're really interested in is that essential indoor use. So we're going to peg it at 4,500 or 6,000, and we're going to use a 3 or 4 person household because those represent something like reality. It's our closest approximation to what people will actually experience. And of course, you can run this analysis with larger households. If you're concerned about how larger families fare, you can run that as 6 people or 8 people or 10 people. There's nothing magic about these numbers. In the things that I've published in the past, I have pegged it at 4-person. I think that's a conservative way to think about affordability, but other utilities, I've seen utilities measured at 3. It's really a judgment call, but I'm going to show you both 3-person and 4-person household sizes. I'm going to price it out separately for TVWD's water prices only, and then we'll also look at the effect when we include the clean water services and wastewater, stormwater services that most folks pay for as well. Or do all folks pay both of those, Paul?
Most. Well, when you pay through a city, because if they're in Beaverton, Tigard, or Hillsborough, they're paying through their city, but it's the same thing.
All right. So most people are paying both of these things. And so it may make sense for us to look at both of them together. The denominator, we're going to look at the 20th percentile income for the service area, and that's going to come from the American Community Survey, the 2021 edition. And then our estimated essential expenditures are going to come from something called the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The essential expenses that we're going to count here are taxes, housing, food, healthcare, and home energy. That's also something of a judgment call. When I've done this analysis in the past, those are the other expenses that I've included. However, I've worked with utilities that want to include childcare, that want to include transportation. Sometimes they want to exclude home energy. Again, there's nothing magic here. I did not receive a stone tablet from the Almighty telling me that these are the essential expenditures. So it's really a judgment call. These are the ones that I have most often included. So that's the preliminaries. Here's what we find. We start with the price. I'm going to walk through how we calculate this thing. We start with the monthly prices. These are the current prices as of this month. For both TVWD and for clean water services. For a 3-person household and a 4-person household, you see how they break down. Which, by the way, nationally is a little unusual. In most parts of the country, sewer and stormwater prices are higher than drinking water. Here, it's backward. We then bring in the 20th percentile income. 20th percentile income in this service area is about $47,000 a year. It's a little bit over $47,000. That's high. By the way, it's about $20,000 more than the national 20th percentile income. So this is a fairly affluent region, a fairly affluent service area. When you estimate the other essential expenses for a 3- and a 4-person household, again, those things are adjusted and they're estimated based on those housing, the home size and the income. We end up with this discretionary income, $1,451 or $1,289. For the 3- or 4-person household. A little simple division gets you to these AR20 values of 4.2%, 5.8% for water alone. If we bring in the sewer and stormwater charges, we get 8% or 10.4%. Those are the current numbers in the service area. What to think about that is a family of four who earns 20th percentile income has to pay 5.8% of its discretionary income for water service, or 10.4% for water, sewer, and stormwater all put together. We go to hours of minimum wage, it's the same numerator. Our denominator is simply the Oregon minimum wage that's set for the Portland metro area. Oregon is a little unusual in that the minimum wage in this state is now automatically adjusted for inflation. So first of all, minimum wage is much higher here than the national minimum wage. And it's set to inflate automatically going forward. So that's pretty unusual nationally. Plus the Portland metro area has a higher minimum wage than the rest of the state. Same numerator we saw before. Those are those monthly bills. I should back up for 1 second. Billing in the district, as I understand, is bi-monthly, but I'm showing everything monthly because most of us are used to thinking about monthly bills, not bi-month. That's just to make it more intuitive, but these are in reality billed by month. So the minimum wage per hour is $14.75. And then, one of the nice things analytically for us here is that actually approximates pretty closely what starting low skilled wage or non-skilled wages are in this area. In some places, there's a pretty yawning gap between the federal 725 and what actual starting wages are in many places. Here, that gap is smaller, so that this is a more realistic picture in some ways. But you do some simple division, and you end up with 4.1 hours for a 3-person household to pay for a month's water service, 7.9 when we throw in the sewer and storm. You can see the numbers for a 4-person household. And the way to think about that is that a worker who earns minimum wage has to pay have to work 5 hours a month to pay for basic water service, and 9.1 hours per month to pay for water and sewer service. I think that captures really nicely that trade-off. What am I not doing? Well, what I am doing to pay for that is I'm working. What am I not doing is whatever else I would have done with my time instead of working for those extra 5 or 10 hours. All right. Those are the current numbers. Let's look at a projection. A couple of thoughts on projections as we go forward. First of all, projections are always tricky. Even in the best, most stable economy, projecting costs and expenditures is hard. You may have noticed we do not have the most stable economy right now. Inflation is running very, very high. We've got a tight labor market. We've got all kinds of global unrest. We've got a little bit of an energy crisis going on. We've got wars happening around the world. So tenuous predictions are even more tenuous today. That's my general caveat. Everything that you're going to see here should be taken as an exercise in proportion, not precision. I think projections are an opportunity to look foolish in 5 years more than they are. All right, so with those caveats, here's what we're going to do. The district has projected across the board rate increases, or excuse me, rate revenue increases that look like this. You've seen it before, 15% next year, 12% the year after that, 10%, and then 4% in each of these fiscal years going forward. We're going to assume for purposes of this exercise that those are across the board rate increases. In other words, we're going to assume for purposes of this exercise that there's no change in the rate structure. A change in rate structure could significantly change these numbers. If we lower or we raise the fixed charge, if we go from 2 blocks to 5 blocks and change the shape and the number of those volume blocks, these numbers could radically change. But we're going to assume for this exercise that we just raise everything by the same percentages. The economic conditions assumptions all come from the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. They put out a report in September 22, just a couple months ago, now that offered short-term projections on economic conditions. So we're using the same assumptions that they put forward. And there are a couple other details in there too. Again, halfly minimum wage increases are set to match inflation, and that's by law in this state. So that's a fairly safe assumption for our modeling purposes. All right, that's what we get. See when we plug into the model, here's what we get. So this is the 3-person household. That heavy darker line, the solid line is the AR20 value. You can see that goes from 4.2% to 5.8%. By the way, this is water only. We don't have projected numbers for clean water services. So these are just for TVWD's charges. Go from 4.2 to 5.8%, and we go from 4.1 hours over this 5-year period, we increase an hour. So 1 hour's labor at minimum wage over that 5-year period. The 4-person household, similar picture, but it's higher and it's a little bit steeper. Go from 5.8% to 8.1%, and 5 hours up to 6.2 hours. So those numbers are rising fast, and what that tells you is that they're rising faster. We built wage inflation into these numbers. We built overall price inflation into these numbers, and yet they're still rising. So that tells you that the price of water service is going up in ways that are going to hit low-income families hard, and harder than the nominal inflation rate. So that's I think, again, a safe claim to make, even though those exact numbers aren't right. That exercise portion I talked about, that's a pretty safe prediction. All right, so this is about the time when I'm giving a talk like this, where people, okay, I've seen a lot of numbers. This is all very good, Professor. So now tell us what's affordable. Is that affordable? Ain't affordable? Well, I'll tell you. I don't know, because deciding what's affordable involves setting a threshold. Thresholds are hard, because when we ask what's affordable, what we're really asking is how much should households of limited means have to pay for water? What kinds of sacrifices, what kind of trade-offs are reasonable to ask people to make? If they don't have a lot of resources, how much should we expect them to sacrifice in order to pay the bill? There's no scientific answer to that question. That's not an empirical question. That's a question about ethics. That's a question about values. It's a question about norms. There's no way to answer that scientifically. That's a matter of community values, and community values vary from place to place. And I've worked with utilities all over the country where they come up with a number, but the number can be very different from place to place. And the numbers that they decide are reasonable are different from place to place. So in some ways, I suspect what this group, and certainly the leadership of the district, are going to have to grapple with is, what are the answers to these questions? And we can quantify the answers to these questions with the numbers that I showed you before, but whether those numbers, whether these are acceptable or not, is not a question I can answer. That's a question for this group to try to tackle. And there is, as I said, no stone tablets. If there was, I would share them. Having said, let me back up 1 second before I show you that. Making good decisions is going to require thinking about those thresholds and thinking about how to address them. One thing I would beseech you to do or not do is don't compare yourselves with other utilities. Setting your affordability policy by comparing yourself to another utility is like buying a pair of shoes by measuring other people's feet. It just doesn't make any sense on its face. If you are a low-income household and you live in Beaverton, the fact that water might be cheaper in Boston and more expensive in Billings is not very relevant. What's relevant is the price that you have to pay right here. It's not like, it's cheaper 10 miles down the road. I'm going to save $5 a month if I move over there. That's not a relevant calculation for a low-income household. So the relevant question is not how are other people's metrics compared to ours. The relevant question is, are your metrics consistent with your values? Are the metrics consistent with your values? And if they're not, what do we do about that? All right, having said that, these numbers I've been throwing up here, they're sort of disembodied. It's difficult to know what they mean. So just to anchor you a little bit, to give those numbers a little bit more meaning, let's look at the national picture. This is from 2019. I'm going to show you 2 years worth of data. I'm going to show you I've done this in 2017, 19, and 21. I'm going to show you 2019 because this is the before times, right? This is when things were kind of normal in the economy. So I think in some ways these are numbers that I feel pretty comfortable with, and they've been published. So if you look nationally, this is the AR20 range. The average is about 16.5. That's up substantially, by the way, from 2017. In 2017, it was about 11, and it jumped 16.5.
Is that, sorry, another question. Is that 16.5% of your income?
Discretionary
income. So
Yeah.
that's and here it was 8 or something and it's projected.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is how it looks nationally. You can see that the majority are relatively low, but there's a long tail. There's a long tail. When you see those really high numbers out there, up over 40, that really says less about the price of water in those places, and it says more about the underlying economy. Those tend to be places that have very, very low incomes. There are cities, there are places in the country where the 20th percentile income is $10,000 or $12,000 a year. Here it's $47,000. So what we're seeing in that long tail out here, this long tail that bulges up at the end, that's really telling a story more about poverty than the price of water. That's 2019. Now I'm going to show you 2021 in a second. I've not published the 2021 numbers. I only just finished them. I tried to update this in 2020, and I'm pretty sure everyone here was aware of what happened in 2020. 2020 was very weird, and the economic data didn't make any sense, so I just threw them out. People were getting federal COVID relief checks, and they were losing their jobs, and then they were getting new jobs, and just the data were messy. So I did this again for 2021. And we're not sure how seriously to take the data because they're still a little weird. They're not as weird, but they're a little weird. So there's the caveat. Here's the AR20 for 2021. So it jumped up even more. And now we scaled it up. These are the numbers over 60. And again, out here, what this is telling us more a story of where places have very high levels of poverty, where that 20th percentile income is very low. But this number, this average AR20 keeps creeping out. And I'm not sure which is more troubling, the prospect that the data are bad or the prospect that the data are accurate. Because it could be that the data are right and things are just getting ugly out there in a lot of communities. I'm not confident enough to stand out there and publish this yet. So take this plot with a grain of salt, but that's where we're at. The comparative number here for TBWD is 10.4. So you can kind of see where we fall in the distribution. That would have been right around average 5 years ago. Now it's significantly below average. And remember these numbers are all water and sewer together. Not just water, it's all water and sewer together. Closing minimum wage picture is a little different. Here's 2019. The data aren't so wacky. This is what number is more reliable. So there's 2019. The national average is right around 10. In 2021, it actually dropped a little bit. How does that happen? Well, it's because minimum wage has been going up. Places like Oregon adopted a much higher minimum wage between 2017 and 2021. And that happened in a lot of communities across the country, especially in the West Coast. So a lot of cities have raised their minimum wage, and that's blunted the effect on this metric sum. And there's your comparative number, about 9.1 here. All right. The time I've got left, talk a little bit about what you do about this. Once we've decided we've got an affordability challenge, what do we do about it? Well, I'm going to start by saying this is a complicated problem, and it demands a complicated or a comprehensive kind of strategic solution. There's no single thing that you can do, no single policy you can adopt that's going to address every affordability problem. So instead of talking about a specific thing, what I'm talking about is broad principles, what I like to call pillars, strategic pillars of affordability, broad principles for setting policy. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, and then with the time we've got left, I'm happy to chat about any of these approaches or any of this analysis. I'm going to start with quality. First principle of affordability. It might seem a little weird to start with quality, but I want to emphasize how important this is. I'm not an engineer. I haven't analyzed the district's plans. I don't know if they're cost justified. I'm going to put my faith in them and assume that the folks who did the engineering did a good job, and that the decisions that they're making for supply are necessary, and the projects are required, the expenditures are necessary. The reason I bring this up, it's easy to lose sight of with these rising prices of what an enormous value water is and how important it is to make the investments and never put off necessary investments in the name of affordability. I see utilities make this mistake all the time. We can't afford that new project. So we can't afford our main replacement program. So we're just going to accept that we're going to have 100 main breaks every winter. Well, 100 main breaks every winter is 100 opportunities for microbial infection. That's 100 opportunities to lose the faith of your customers. And here's why that matters for affordability specifically. The unit cost of a gallon of water from different sources, where water that people are going to drink. Tualatin Valley Water District is about a penny compared to these other popular sources of drinking water. At the end of this capital program, prices are going to go up a lot. Tualatin Valley Water District, all the way up to 2 cents a gallon at the end of this project. That's an important picture to keep in mind as we look at all of the other alternatives, because this value only holds if the quality is excellent. When people lose faith in this product, then this product becomes infinitely more valuable. Because it doesn't matter what a good deal my tap water is if I believe the tap water is bad. If I believe it's going to make me sick, if there's boil water notices in my neighborhood over and over and over again, I'm going to abandon this product, start buying this product. And if I drink all the water that the CDC suggests that I drink, and I drink bottled water, and I have a family of 4, that's going to cost me something like $150 a month. I'd be much better off paying my utility bill. That's actually the theme of the book that Tom very nicely plugged. And thank you, Tom. I stand to make literally tens of dollars in royalties from this book. But then one of the major findings of this book is that people who distrust their tap water will abandon it for commercial products instead. They'll buy water kiosks, they'll buy bottled water, and counterintuitively, the first people to abandon tap water and buy bottled water are the poorest. Also, racial and ethnic minority populations are the first to drop tap water and start drinking bottled water. So the most vulnerable among us and the poorest among us are the people who will abandon tap water first. That's why quality always has to be the first consideration in affordability. All right, I can get off my soapbox on that now. Efficiency. Again, I'm not an engineer. I'm going to assume that we're only doing things to capture efficiency. I know Paul does a lot of really clever and creative things with financing to make your cost of capital low. So I'm going to skip past efficiency now and get to kind of the things that maybe we're more interested in here specifically. And I'm going to talk about rate design as the third big pillar of affordability. There are a couple of things that we can do with rate design that help with affordability. One of them is inclined block rates, progressive pricing where the unit cost of water increases as volume increases. Now, the district already has inclined block rates, but it's only a 2-block structure. So one of the things that you can do is look at lowering the price of the very first few units of water and then making it progressively more expensive at the higher volumes, because that does a couple of things for low-income customers. One is give people more control of their own bill so that they can be more conservative and save a little money. The other is that income positively correlates with water consumption. It's common for people to say, well, water consumption is inelastic, and that is true in a narrow econometric sense. But it is also true that water consumption is positively correlated with income. Okay, so people who have larger square foot homes, more acreage in their yards, tend to use more water. They also tend to be wealthier. So that progressive pricing does have progressive sort of distributive effect. So you can help with affordability by keeping the first few units of water relatively inexpensive. The other thing you can do is keep the fixed charges relatively low. Now, so I want to back up 1 second. Some of the most affordable water among large water systems in the United States is Phoenix, right? Middle of the desert. How do they do that? Well, it's partly because Uncle Sam built a lot of their water infrastructure back in the 1960s, 1950s to 60s. But beyond that, one of the things that Phoenix does is has an extremely low fixed charge and very, very low first volume block. But if you start using more water after that, especially in the summertime, it becomes very, very expensive. But they do it by keeping that first initial block low and the fixed charge is very low. A lot of times, utility managers are squeamish about doing that. And it's because you necessarily increase revenue volatility. If it rains all summer and you don't sell a lot of water, now maybe you don't make as much money as you were anticipating, and that can leave you in trouble if you don't have sufficient financial reserves. So it's a balancing act, and it's not an easy one. With sufficient financial reserves, it's one that you can manage, but it's not easy. One of the ways to try to square that circle, and one of the things I'll throw out there for this group to consider, some utilities will try to address that by building an allowance, building a volume allowance, and say something like, well, we're going to make your fixed charge, let's say, I'll make up a number. We're going to make your fixed charge $25 a month or $30 a month. But with that, we're going to include your first 2,000 gallons. So your first three CCF, something like that. We're going to build into that. And that gives people a certain amount of financial stability. It also gives the utility a certain amount of financial stability. That's an especially advantageous approach in a resort community or a place where there are a lot of snowbirds. I don't know if that's the population here, where people leave seasonally, the wealthier population leaves seasonally. It's a good way to go. The other thing I'll talk about is timing. Right now, the district bills bi-monthly. A lot of places in the country build bi-monthly. A lot of places build quarterly. My utility bills quarterly. I wish they didn't. Some bill semi-annually, right? It's kind of all over the place. One of the things we know about low-income families is that they do much better handling more frequent smaller bills than less frequent larger bills, even if the total amount of dollars is the same. So a low-income family will handle 12 bills of $50 each much more easily than they will 6 bills of $100 each. So total dollar value the same, but it's just struggling month to month making those ends meet. We know that from a lot of consumer behavior data from other fields. So what's one thing to consider is frequency of billing. I move to the fourth pillar, which is means-tested assistance. Now, I think once folks recognize maybe we've got an affordability problem, their minds immediately go to means-tested assistance. Let's figure out who's struggling and try to discount their bill, try to get them some help. And that makes a lot of sense intuitively. There are some common programs out there. Discounts are the most common. They will just say we're going to knock 20% off your bill, 40% off your bill, 50% off your bill, or maybe we'll reduce it $10, $20. Different utilities do different ways. A lot of utilities have emergency relief programs. If you've got one significant expense, maybe you had a car crash, you have a medical expense. Sometimes people can put in for a one-time relief. And then there are some utilities have these fixture replacement programs, knowing that oftentimes that high consumption that happens in low-income households is because they have old fixtures. They're in poor housing stock. So inefficient toilets and appliances. And so sometimes utilities will develop programs that will help them replace fixtures and appliances. The thing I want to say about this stuff, I want to point out, these programs are important and they help a lot, but we need to be sober and realistic in our expectations about how much an assistance program can do. There's some pretty common problems. One is that these programs are costly to administer. They are means tested assistance programs. Any means tested assistance program is costly to administer. That's just an empirical reality. As long as America has done means tested assistance, it's been costly. The administrative burden is huge. The difference between cost and burden is worth exploring. The term administrative cost refers to the cost to the utility of running a program. You got to pay people on the staff. You got to develop protocols. You have to manage the system. You have to do reporting and auditing and appeals and all that. That's an administrative cost. The administrative burden refers to the cost to the participant of joining the program. And that includes things like just learning that there is a program, then applying for that program, for occasionally reapplying, gathering all the materials that you need. Some utilities require people to do an in-person visit, right? Most of them dropped that during COVID. But there can be a lot of costs associated with applying to these programs, and we call those administrative burdens. And one of the consequences of those administrative burdens is relatively low participation, something to keep in mind. There's never been a systematic national study of water or sewer assistance programs. I have looked at a couple of dozen. Participation in these programs typically runs somewhere around 20% of the eligible population. And that's with utilities doing everything that they can to try to publicize it. The best I've ever seen for a utility of any significant size is San Antonio, and they get about 50% participation. And they do that, they empty the playbook, and they've got 3 full-time staff who do nothing but work on this program, publicizing it. They spend a lot, they work very hard, doing all kinds of things to reach out. Much more common is the experience of what you'd see. You probably at some point have heard about Philadelphia's very famous assistance program. They'll call it a rate structure. It's not a rate structure. It's just an assistance program with very well publicized, well marketed assistance program that reaches about 25% of its eligible population. And I could go off about that, but Philadelphia spends enormous sums of money to get very low participation in that program. And that goes back to administrative burden. Look, at some level, poor folks aren't stupid, they're just poor. Poor folks, this means they don't have a lot of money. And what they're going to do is make a rational calculation. How much time is it going to take me to provide all of the information that this utility is requiring of me? And then how many hours am I not working? How many hours do I have? How much time am I not spending looking after my kids or my elderly parents or the other things that I need to do just so I can participate in this program that's going to save me what, 15, 20 bucks a month? Maybe. They're just going to make that calculation and not participate. Yeah.
Quick question on the means test. Are you saying that you're validating these customers to make sure that they are low income?
Correct. Correct. That's what we mean.
It could be self-certified though.
You could self-certify. Yeah, right. And that's the places that have gone with self-certification have seen higher participation, and utilities who have done that. I'll tell you, there's one utility, only one I know of, that did self-certification before COVID. And they got very high participation, but it was a tiny, tiny utility where everybody knew everybody. So if you rolled in and said, I qualify, that billing clerk knows who you are, and it's going to give you over the glasses look if you don't actually qualify. But yeah, you can go to self-certification, and some utilities have done that. We'll see if they keep that up now that the pandemic's done and the federal dollars are not flowing the way they were. But you can't do that. Sir.
The implication of self-certification could lead to fraud. Is there any data about how much fraud occurs?
No. The short answer is no. We don't have those data. I mean, fraud will occur. Any program, anywhere, at any time that gives out money will have fraud. How much the fraud is, if it's 1 or 2 cases across the country, maybe we don't care. If it's rampant and it's costing a lot, then maybe we start to care about it. I think a lot about what happened with the small business forgivable loan program that we had under COVID. People could self-certify, small businesses could self-certify, and they effectively just got free money from Uncle Sam. That's a different program. That's not water assistance, but yeah, it could be. That's the concern. Yes, sir.
Have any means testing to reduce their administrative cost, work with other programs. So they say they can check a list. If they get certified with Group A, everybody in the city uses Group A and they just all go. Yep, it's done once, and that way everyone saves time, money. Effort.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, some folks have tried these things. There's, as I said, there's never been a systematic study out there to compare different models. But yeah, there are some that will just cross-verify, right? They might even do something, there's always personal confidentiality and personal information concerns, right, with these things. But in places where they've been able to work through those problems, I know at least a couple of utilities where they've got the list of folks who, for example, might qualify for SNAP, which is like the food stamps program. And they'll just look down the list, and these folks, they matches our customers, we'll just automatically enroll them. Or at least if we can't automatically enroll them, we'll reach out proactively and say, hey, we think you might qualify. Would you like to come apply? So there are things that you can do. And that's actually a really important point when we think about ways to try to reduce the administrative burden. We want to make it easy for people to learn about the program. We want to make it easier for people to sign up. To the extent that we can make these burdens low, while also avoiding the problems of fraud. That's the narrow path we're trying to walk here. But this administrative burden is probably the single biggest issue that leads to the low participation. There's a lot of folks in the Philadelphia program, the exit interviews, if you will. A lot of folks do that program for 1 year and then drop out because they just find the paperwork onerous. And so they receive their discount for a year and then they never sign up again. That's the problem with a more carefully tailored program, is that it's onerous on the participant, and there are things that you can try to do to reduce that. Other things that people try to do with administrative burdens is they will sometimes work with community organizations that already are handling administration for other means tested programs, or sometimes folks who are already handling LIHEAP, handling Section 8 programs, SNAP administration. And so sometimes utilities will work with those organizations, try to create something like a one-stop shop for a low-income family that's trying to get assistance. But that's not cheap. I mean, that's not easy. Those community organizations don't do it for free. So that's a cost that gets built in as well. So these are considerations. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not standing up in here and telling you don't do means tested assistance. I'm saying you should do means tested assistance, but be sober and realistic about how much that program is going to, how many people you're going to help. You can do absolutely, I describe it like baseball, if you're baseball fans. You can do absolutely everything right. You can be supremely talented and study carefully, and you're going to fail 2/3 of the time. You can be an all-star. You can be a Hall of Famer. You're going to fail at bat 2/3 of the time. Assistance programs are like that. If you do everything right, you're still probably only going to reach maybe a minority of the folks out there. SNAP gets 47% participation, right? So, excuse me, SNAP is the exception. TANF gets 47%. SNAP gets 85% participation. One of the things I've long advocated, it's beyond the scope of this group, but I've long advocated that SNAP should be used to pay for water. That would take an act of Congress. I don't think we have any members of Congress here, so no, that's probably not good.
Yes.
Last thing you want to talk about? Yes, sir.
Is the low participation driven by the fact that people perceive it as not being worthwhile to spend their time on it? In other words, if I have to go get a building permit to replace my toilet,
yeah,
do I bother getting a building permit or just replace the toilet?
Right. The real and the honest answer is we don't know.
Okay.
What we know from decades of research on other kinds of means tested programs is that there's a combination of things. One of the things is simply cultural. You have to trust the government at some level in order to participate in a program like this. And there are some people who just don't. And there are some people for whom it's a matter of culture, it's a matter of pride. There does not matter. They would rather have their water shut off than accept a handout.
Okay.
That is a reality for some people. Far more often, though, I think that they are making that rational calculation that you just described. They're thinking about the time that it's going to take. You know, if I'm looking at the time it's going to take to gather all the documentation that I need to apply, they're going to ask me questions. Many utilities that have these programs are going to ask questions like, who's living in your home? In some states, they're going to ask about immigration status. They're going to ask, in some states, you know, they're going to do a screen to see if anyone's got a criminal record. You know, they're going to ask, maybe there's things that I don't necessarily want the government to know about who's in my house and what's happening there and who's making money. So if I'm not willing to share that information, then I'm not going to participate. The other thing is that sometimes folks are just intimidated by the forms themselves, right? I see a form that, you know, it's 3 pages long. It's got all these things I got to check and certify this and certify this and certify this. And at the end, there's a thing that says under penalty of perjury, I declare everything is right. Well, you know, if I'm already a little squeamish about my relationship with government, I'm not going to do that. I'm running low on time, I think. So let me talk about delinquency management real quick. You can do everything right. Some folks are still not going to be able to pay. So what do we do when people fall delinquent? Happily, empirically, when folks get their water shut off for non-payment, most get restored almost immediately because it's just an oversight. But there are some folks who really honestly can't afford it. So what do? The common approach, of course, is shut people off. As a shut off is a failure. Like nobody gets into the water business because they want to shut off people's supply. It is a failure. It is bad, 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 bad. I won't go off about why it's so bad. Utilities do things like forbearance. They'll let people extend payments. They'll try to do structured payment plans. I have become kind of a fan of using property liens as an alternative. In a world of bad outcomes, it's maybe the least bad. Because what happens then is that if a customer falls behind on their bill, falls too far delinquent, the outstanding balance goes onto the property tax rolls instead, and it becomes a matter of the courts to deal with. So the same way that you would deal with falling delinquent on the property tax. And the good thing about a lien, there's nothing good about the lien. The least bad thing about a lien, is it keeps the water flowing. It keeps the water flowing. So you don't let a financial problem become a public health problem. You don't get a financial problem become a I lose my kids to child protective services problem. So the home stays habitable and we keep the essential service flowing. Some structured forgiveness. This is a novel approach. City of Toledo is playing with this idea where people make partial payments and then there's kind of a matching forgiveness. In Ohio, that's legal. I'm not sure about Oregon. Phoenix is playing with the idea of a flow restrictor. So they've introduced the idea that they're not going to shut anybody off, but they're going to reduce the pressure that's coming into a home. So you still get enough water that you can drink, you can bathe, you can flush your toilets, but it's going to be very, very slow. That way, they're trying to avoid the public health problem that I was talking about earlier. That's the end of my prepared talks. I'm probably out of time, right?
No, well, I wanted to make sure there's more time for questions. That was a lot of information that you
Yeah.
shared, but it's really fascinating. And yes, question here?
Your meme comment just triggered something in my mind. When we're talking low-income people, are most of them renters? Where a lien wouldn't necessarily do anything?
Yeah, renters. The answer is yes. I mean, that's often the case with low-income folks. Let me step back and say a couple of things. On the narrow question of liens, yeah, a lien is not going to. A lien would go to the property owner, so then it becomes a dispute between the tenant and the landlord. If the tenant is responsible for the water bill and then falls behind, it becomes the landlord's problem. And then presumably the landlord would deal with it through like an eviction process, or they'd raise the rent to get the money. But that points at a deeper problem, which is the problem of folks who struggle with the cost of water or sewer service but don't actually pay a water or sewer bill. So people who live in multifamily are paying water for water. They don't get it for free, but they're paying for it through their rent. Well, we don't necessarily want to give assistance to the building owner because the building owner is not poor, probably. So how we get assistance with, there's a very clever term of art we use for those folks who pay for their water through rent. We call them hard to reach because they're hard to reach. And that's a thorny problem. Different utilities are trying a few different things to try to reach them, but it's a perennial challenge.
Jack?
Curious, just to refresh, this is staff. What was the relief program that we offered from UWD, and it was completely used, correct, last cycle?
Paul?
Yeah, so, well, we did several things. First of all, some were tied to COVID. We had the structured forgiveness. We actually did that here where we had structured forgiveness where we incentivized people to get on a payment plan and stay on the payment plan. But primarily what we have is the customer emergency assistance program. So when Manny was talking about the different programs, ours is that, you know, and it goes back over time. It was, you lost your job, you got in a car accident, you had a medical bill. Once per year you could come in, but we didn't have something that was permanent, sustained month after month for customers.
For sure.
You had mentioned that 85% participation in SNAP.
Yeah.
You also gave a 47%. What program was the 40?
That's for TANF welfare. It used to be called AFDC, Aid to Family with Dependent Children.
Okay.
It's the classic sort of welfare program. That participation, that's about 47%.
Thank you.
At least it was before the pandemic. Pandemic screwed everything up with these numbers. So like, I don't know what the numbers are now.
So
I was just curious.
before we pass it on to Jason to kind of help explain what does this mean as we move forward with this committee on recommendations they're going to make to the Board of Commissioners, I wanted to see if anybody here had any thoughts to share about the numbers that were presented here about the bottom of the middle class. Is that sometimes called like the people working full-time jobs and still not making it, or the hourly rate number that was shared here? Any thoughts when you looked at that? Yes, Commissioner. Sorry. I'll just go from right to left. Sorry.
At a time.
Yeah.
So non-normal distribution.
Yeah.
Using the average as the measure of central tendency. Why not the median?
Are you talking about the national?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could use the median.
Is it that much different?
Yeah, it is. It's significantly lower, especially on the AR20. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but you saw that long tail.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pulling it up.
The right skew.
I mean, again, I don't want to make too much of that distribution because ultimately it's not all that relevant for the decisions that the folks in this room need to make. As I've said, the national average is not relevant to someone who lives here. What's relevant is what I need to pay.
The Kyle Center also publishes your reports in whether they're 10 tenants article. And I noticed that the highest rates are all West Coast based. And we're West Coast based as well.
Yeah.
Is there regionality to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, because one of the biggest factors, there's kind of two big factors that I think cause huge swings from place to place. The biggest single most important one is poverty. It's income. Places where there's very large income disparities, you're going to see the worst numbers. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is cost of housing, which is high here, right? I got a really angry note from somebody in San Francisco when I published my first version of these, because San Francisco was like the worst in the country.
Yeah, they've got your worst numbers here.
Yeah, well, and that's because the price of everything is high in the Bay Area, right? And that's all driven by land prices.
I just want to make sure we had another question.
He was answering. Okay. So yeah, I mean, in general, these things are going to look worse where housing prices are higher. Now, incomes also tend to be higher, but also income inequality. The rising tide doesn't lift all the boats equally. So this is a very affluent area. One of the points I want to make, this is a very affluent area. The 20th percentile income is $20,000 higher here than it is nationally. So this is an affluent area. Poverty in this community, in your service area, poverty rate is only about 9%. So we're talking about, which is significantly lower than nationally. But the service population is 240,000 people. small percentage of a large number is still a pretty large number. So even if you have a very small population, relatively speaking, like in percentage terms, we're still talking about 10, 20,000 people who could be struggling to make ends meet, and where those rising prices really are going to eat away at those. It's really going to start forcing some of those tough trade-offs. So I mean, the good news is you come to this problem from a position of strength. This is a much harder conversation for me to have in places like Cleveland, where the 20th percentile income is $11,000. Where like you got a capital program, anything that you charge is tough. So at least we're coming to that from a position of strength here.
I think there's two more questions. I wanted to make sure, I think you had your hand up.
I did actually, your AR ratio and your hours worked, that was specific to Tualatin Valley.
Right.
And I know you cautioned us about not comparing ourselves to other utilities, but I'm curious, do you have any information that's like because we're part of the metro area, so your larger data set is actually the metro area.
That's in your presentation.
And
Stay tuned.
with one caveat,
Yeah.
we've got the numerator for different places, but not the denominator.
For the affordability ratio,
Yeah.
you can calculate hours of minimum wage anywhere.
Well, that's fair enough, because it's the same.
It's the same here, yeah.
But the discretionary income, we didn't recalculate that for each of the communities.
Was there another, did you have a question? No. Any other questions before we turn it over to Jason? I just wanted to say that was really fascinating and interesting what you presented for us today. And I did have one actual thought when I was looking at it, not as a facilitator, but as a mom, when I had a young kid, I remember how much daycare costs, and that would blow your numbers up a lot if that was included in that.
Yeah, and the California Public Utilities Commission adopted my metrics happily to calculate utilities, and they bundle all of the telecom and home energy along with it, and they included childcare and transportation into their calculation.
Did it have a big impact?
Oh, yeah, and it's California, so housing prices in many places are very high. California's a big, diverse state. There's some places that are cheap too.
Yeah.
And what you choose to put in and take out of that denominator, it matters.
Can I ask, I'm sorry. So from your perspective, I mean, you gave the monthly billing matters to low income. But do you have any quantifiable, like how much, how big of a deal is it?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you. I have been trying for years to convince a utility to let me run a study that analyze exactly that question. And I always get a lot of, yeah, that's a great idea, Manny, and then they don't do it.
That's a great idea, Manny.
Yeah. I can tell you, the trouble is when utilities go from bi-monthly to monthly billing, delinquencies almost always fall. I mean, I can think of, I'll talk about when I know specifically. I keep thinking about Cleveland, because I've been working with them on some other stuff. But Cleveland went from bi-monthly to monthly billing, I think about 5 years ago, and delinquencies dropped dramatically. Now, I cannot stand here with confidence and tell you how much of that was due from bi-monthly to monthly billing, because lots of other things are changing at the same time. Rates are changing, the economy's changing, people are moving in and out, so I can't isolate it. Maybe it rained all summer and people didn't use as much water. I don't know. So it's not a controlled study, but there's a huge literature in consumer economics that just shows that this is generally true of all things, of all kinds of goods that people buy. That low-income families can handle, low-income households handle numerous small bills more easily than quantitatively comparable larger bills.
Thank you very much. And Jason, you're up.
We need a break at all?
We could take a 5-minute, do people want to take a 5-minute break or keep going? Yeah, 5 minutes, okay? We'll be back at 7:30. Jenna?
All right, man, nice.
We're doing well here. There are no unanswered chat questions. And everyone seems to be able to participate. I haven't heard anything otherwise.
It was equity.
I was wondering if any of the Yeah. On to the public, public comment. Yeah, big time.
And the actual.
Yeah.
Some of the consumption.
Right.
Is built in different cycles.
Because of the timing of.
Yeah, no.
Because we're looking at different options of how to get them off the building. It's not actual seats.
For you?
Get started again. Now we're up and running. All right. Oh, do you have the, oh, yeah, let me add the. Okay.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, you just heard from one of the foremost experts in the field on affordability. Got a lot of questions. That's good. My job, though, is to snap back to reality. So as you're going through this process with CWD, we're looking for you to give them some recommendations on programs that they might institute here that can help address these needs, right? What I'm going to bring you back to is some of the things that we talked about during the kickoff meeting, things that you're going to need to weigh in on so that you can give them the advice that they need to get. Really, I think it comes down to you needing to weigh in on about 4 questions so that we can get to those recommendations. One is, what are the needs? And so these metrics that we've looked at tonight, whether it's AR20 or hours of minimum wage, I think these are going to be really helpful for you to help identify really what those needs are. I'll give you some examples in a second. But what metric do you want to manage to? And then based on that, how much assistance per eligible account is going to be needed in order to do that? Show you some ways that we might be able to get to that using some of the metrics that Manny just gave us just a minute ago. That qualification question, and I was writing down the notes as you all were asking these questions about, well, how do we do that? You know, is there a way people could self-qualify for these kinds of programs? Does that even work? What about fraud? What about all those things? But really that comes down to how many, what's our total population of customers that we're dealing with? Because that's going to tell us the maximum number of those who might potentially qualify. Get some basis of reality out of that. So if we're talking, just for example, if we're talking about the 20th percentile of income, that limits us to a certain number of people. And if we're talking about a subset of that, then we're talking about fewer people. And if we're talking about just single family residential accounts out of that group of people, we're talking about another subset. So as you whittle down on the onion here, you get to different numbers each time. I'll give you some examples of how we might use that information. Participation rate. We talked a lot about that, and you heard that during the kickoff meeting that we had, is that participation rates is sort of the bane of existence to customer assistance programs. 10 to 30% is pretty normal. If you're getting more than that, you really are Babe Ruth in the world of baseball heroes. You're doing better. You're punching way above your weight. But that's going to tell us how many do we expect out of the group that qualifies that may actually participate in this program. And it's going to give us another number, the expected number of customers who will potentially qualify. And then based on that, we're going to be able to come up with this value that's going to tell us, hey, TVWD, remember how you told us that you're putting $250,000 every year into this customer assistance program of yours? It's going to give us a pretty good sense of whether that's enough or whether you might want to recommend that they do more or maybe less. You asked for it, and Manny told us not to do this. But I knew you'd want to see it anyway, so we're going to do it. So, Paul, I don't know if you presented this at the kickoff meeting, but Paul Matthews, the CFO for the district that you know and love, sitting over there, had already done a survey of the typical water bills for others in this region right here. You were asking this question just a little while ago. And if you take that typical water bill and we normalize that, so for TVWD, that's 7 CCF per month. So Manny talked about 3 people and 4 people, and you have different water usages for those, and that's important information. But what I'm going to talk about, we're going to talk about 7 CCF per month. That's what the district's been communicating. That's what the average water bill is. That's what we're going to use just for these examples. Okay, so if we take that 7 CCF per month and we apply it to the rates that have been approved for all of these folks here across the bottom here, we're going to get a bill for that amount. We divide that by $14.75 in every case. We get the hours minimum wage, same metric that Manny was telling you about for TVWD. Now, at 7 CCF, does this have a pointer on it? Beautiful. At 7 CCF, that number is a little bit higher than the 4.2 number for the 3-member household that he was showing you before. That's to be expected, right? Different bill. But TVWD at the moment is here sort of at the top of the region. Something about these numbers that that's worth noting, besides the fact that Manny's right, it doesn't really matter what the bill is in Wilsonville to people who live in TVWD. Are you planning to move? Because that's what you're faced with there in that decision. The real question is, how much is the bill in TVWD? But as you're looking at this data, something else to keep in mind is that's a snapshot. You know, these rates that all of these folks have approved right now today, they're not staying there. TVWD is ahead of some of the curves here. You got a partner in Hillsborough right now, it's sitting down here. They're also members of this giant Willamette project. Have they incorporated that into their rates yet? Maybe, maybe not. City of Portland, they're planning to do a new filtration plant. It's going to cost them a couple $2 billion when it's all said and done. A lot of these folks here that you see here, they buy water from Portland. In fact, TVWD buys water from Portland, at least today. By the time they get the program in place, won't be doing that. Point of this is that these numbers aren't static. They're going to be changing. They're all going to have cost drivers that go with it. So are we to take anything from this in terms of averages or anything like that? Well, we could, but let's just take a couple of data points so that we can go through some examples and maybe help you understand how you might use this information to help you make some recommendations for TVWD later on. Right now, that metric sits at 4.8. So if we were okay with that and we wanted to say, okay, as we go forward and we know that the bills are going to increase, we might reason that, hey, you know, something that we might want to hang on to is this 4.8 number. So in other words, let's not get worse in the future. Let's try to keep it at 4.8, even as we go out and we make these investments and the bills we know are going to go up. That's one thought. We could do that. You might also say, you know, it's where it's at today isn't really good enough for me, in my opinion. I would much rather see that closer to something like 4 hours. Or you might say some other number. But for the example we're going to run through tonight, we're just going to say that maybe there's some folks out there who would just like to see 4.8 improved to 4. This will become more important as we work through the example. I'm going to give you those 2 data points, though, just for now. So depending on that level that we set, we can come to at least some idea of how much assistance we might need to provide to a given customer in order to hit that metric. And the great thing about these metrics are, it's math. So I can back into this number and I can do it really quickly. I didn't even have to think that hard. But what this graph right here is showing us is how much monthly assistance TVWD would have to provide. In this case, the dark blue ones, if we wanted to hit 4 hours at minimum wage. This is how much assistance would need to be provided. In other words, discounts to the bill. And with this lower number here, that's if we maintain 4.8 hours. So you can see substantial difference in the amount of assistance that's provided to hit the lower metric. Should make sense. If we want to do better, that means, at least in terms of the metric, that means we have to give more in order to make that work. Make sense? Okay.
So Jason, what is 1593 quantify?
Per month.
District.
Per.
No, I know that. So now what's your estimated population that you're looking at?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
We're going to work through each of the 4 questions. So this is for a given customer. If we want to hit 4 hours of minimum wage, then we need to be able to provide $15.93 in bill assistance in 2023. And by 2026, it needs to be more like $26.49 per month. All right, so let's park that number for a minute and we'll move on to the next question. Qualification, big question. We had lots of discussion about it tonight. Important questions. I learned some things myself, right? So some of the things that Manny talked about was administrative burden, not to the district, but to the participants. How much do they have to go through in order to even qualify for this? And that's a great way to think about it. There's also administrative cost to the district. One of the things that we did talk about at the kickoff meeting was how water utilities in general aren't all that well situated to do income verifications. They're not a social services agency. And, Manny shared with me once this idea of using SNAP benefits as a means of doing just this, qualifying customers and also then providing the level of assistance needed to pay for these bills. I think it's brilliant. But we don't have that available to us right now. So if we're going to qualify customers, we got to figure out how we're going to do that. Community Action of Washington County is probably your closest social services agency that does that sort of thing. They've issued this report. You can go see that on their website, Issues of Poverty 2020, Community Action of Washington County. And we got a couple of metrics that we can pull out of that will help us for our example. So Community Action of Washington County says in this report that 5% of the county households are below the federal poverty level, So let's keep that number in mind. And when you break down the quintiles of income, as Mandy did for his AR20, it comes out to about 17,000 households. I rounded it. I'll make that easy for you, that fit into that lowest quintile of income. All right, so what's that going to tell us? Well, we need to do kind of one more thing with that. If we're looking at 5% and we apply that number really kind of across the board to the number of single-family residential households of the district. Right now, there's about 56,380 single-family residential households in the district. If we get down to 5%, we might reason that about 2,800 of those are at or below the federal poverty level. It's not a great number, right? We don't have any statistics that are going to tell us that 2,800 of my single-family residential accounts are at or below federal poverty level. The data just don't exist. It would take an incredible amount of data collection in order to do that. So we're going to back into that number as best we can with some numbers that we do have available to give us a reasonable range of what we might expect there. At the upper end, if we have 17,000 households at this lowest quintile, well, we might reason then that about 11,200 of those are single-family residential customers. How did we get to that number? Well, it's 20% again of 56,380. Also not a great number, right? But it gives us something that we can think about, something that can help guide our thinking. And there's a midpoint here. I'm just going to give you that point right in between the two, 7,000. All right, why are we focusing on single-family customers? Comment was made that a lot of the folks who are going to be in this low income situation could easily be renters. And that's true. And that's something that we do need to think about throughout this process. But one of the things we have to kind of come to terms to is that a lot of those customers, they don't get water bills from TVWD. And so Manny said, they have a name for these folks. They're called hard to reach. It's true. It's going to be really hard for us to reach them. And so when I say that our program's likely going to focus on single family customers, that's because we know how to reach them. We actually give them a bill. We can do something on that bill. It's available to us. If we have to go through it indirectly, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do it. So at least for this example, we're going to say that these are single family customers that we're working with. All right, so we've got a big number that we've whittled down to smaller numbers. The 5% of my customers, if I'm only going to focus on those at the federal poverty level, we're probably looking at a maximum number of customers in this range of maybe 3,000 single-family households.
Do you know how many customers are at the 60% area median income level? Because that's the level, instead of federal poverty level, that's the level that's typically associated with more of the programs like LIHEAP and LIHWA and so forth.
And I think that's what CDWD uses too for the emergency assistance.
So I think we need to do some full disclosure here. So you're with Community Action of Washington County. They are a partner. And in fact, we worked quite a bit with you all during the pandemic.
Yeah.
With Saul, and I don't know your.
So before my time, I'm pretty new.
Well, you are.
Yeah.
Okay. And we set the qualifications to parallel the LIHEAP program. So we're using acronyms here. What's LIHEAP? Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. It's a federal program that helps low-income people pay for heat for energy in their home. So to reduce the administrative burden and to reduce the administrative cost, we partnered with Community Action and said, look, we'll set our eligibility guidelines the same. So you go in, you qualify for one, you qualify for both. And that's I think somebody asked a question about that. I think it was Mr. Brown may have mentioned that earlier. So we have the flexibility. That's what you guys, we get a little further down the road in this presentation, start talking about eligibility to marry these programs up so we can avoid some of that administrative burden and administrative cost. But what was your question? I don't think I answered.
Well, I just did the assumption that we're starting and whittling these numbers down based on the federal poverty level, the number of people in that. That's a big assumption.
Totally.
That's starting with a
Full disclosure, big assumption.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the demographic data don't match to your single family customer numbers.
And the other challenge we had is that with the COVID relief, instead of being 60% of median household income for the state, it was 60% of the median household income for the Washington County, which is yet a different number. So all these things were spinning around. Now that was because there was a pandemic. We got to land this thing into our normal operations at some point. But as we go through this, we need to keep that in mind is how can we be smart to manage that administrative burden? I think there's an
also
opportunity.
just making the point about how many people, because the logic of this presentation is headed towards, well, we're just really not going to be able to help that many people with this. So this is a big assumption to start with, the federal poverty level.
Well, I just want to say, this is just an example. I think that these are not the numbers. I think he's just using this as a construct.
Sure.
You have-
Analogy.
Points were made in that whatever you come up with, whatever your thinking is applying it in this kind of way is going to help you get to the answers to the questions that you're going to come to.
Okay.
So whether you want to talk about 60% of federal poverty level or 80% or 120%, if you're interested in those numbers, we'll work hard to get them for you so that you can make those decisions. I'm just trying to give you some ideas on how to kind of synthesize all this and use it later.
Looks like Chris has a question, but I was wondering if you want to ask your question. I just want to make sure we're watching the time. There's 10 minutes left. If you have a chance to do your presentation, Chris, please ask your question.
Do we have an idea of how many Section 8 apartment complexes there are within the district?
I don't have it.
Well, so the problem is it's not only Section 8 apartments, but you have to be qualified and get the voucher.
Right.
So
And the apartment complex has to be qualified to accept the voucher.
yes. So
That's what I was kind of getting at.
we have an expert room.
So Section 8 voucher holders, they can go to any apartment complex and apply. Source of income is a protected class. So that means that landlords aren't allowed to say, no, I won't accept your voucher. So Section 8 voucher holders, somebody applies for the Section 8 housing program, they get qualified, they get a voucher. They take that voucher to any available, either apartment home, single family home, something that's for rent.
Okay.
And then the landlord has to participate in that. So it's not quite as simple as saying this whole community is Section 8. There's many voucher holders, and I'm sure that Housing Authority of Washington County can request that information.
I asked that because when I was many years ago renting an apartment, I was told this is a Section 8 facility, you can't.
Oh, yeah, they did away with that in like 2008.
Okay, yeah, I'm talking late nineties, so
Yeah.
that's why I raised the question.
Just a real quick, one more thing on participation level. So now that we've kind of talked about maybe what is the maximum number we might be dealing with, given some big assumptions, fair point. We start applying participation rates to those numbers and we get another set of values. This is just meant to give you a range, but you know, if you're able to get to 5% participation, a very low level of participation, and you're talking about those 3 points we just talked about, you're at 140 to 560 single family households. You know, the district was able to get around 20% for its more recent program. So maybe you're looking at a range somewhere in here. And of course, if you're thinking that what we need the district to do is go out and do, you know, full court press on the outreach, you know, maybe we get better participation levels, in which case we need to anticipate higher numbers, right? That's all we're trying to get to here is depending on where you start from, and then apply a participation level to that, you got values that you need to be thinking about in terms of how the size of the program will work. Just based on this example, you can kind of see where you might end up with that kind of thinking. Walk you through this real quick. On this side here, we're trying to shoot for this 4 hours minimum wage target. And for this example, we're just going to assume that we're trying to reach a 20% participation level. So many variables involved here that if I try to graph all of it, there's no way anyone will be able to understand it. So on that front, through 2023 through 2026, depending on sort of which of the target levels we want to get to, whether it's the lowest quintile, we want to try to meet the needs of all the lowest quintile or the middle of that, or just at the federal poverty level, we're going to need to see a program size somewhere in this range. This dark line here represents where the district is currently funding the emergency assistance program, about $250,000. What?
Yeah, it's 250.
It's 250.
What happened to my?
Your line's off by 100 grand.
Just grab it, move it up.
I know, because I spent a lot of time, but okay, somebody messed with my line.
If we were to adjust these minimum wages to include the offset because of payroll tax, like income tax and social security, how does that skew this?
Just, it would shift.
Does that make these things 20% higher?
It's linear, so if you're at minimum wage and you reduced it by X percent.
Is gross.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not net. So to actually see the impact this has on our population, we have to somehow deal with it in the net terms.
That's one way to look at it. Or the other way is you work 4.x hours for water and another 3 hours or 4 hours for Social Security and another for TriMet, et cetera.
Yeah, but it's not, because all those are discounted by the federal tax burden and the state tax burden. So it's just what these allow is comparison.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's not an absolute thing.
Right.
Jason, I just want to make sure, because we are short on time, but you have a hand up. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
to ask your
Maybe it's
question.
a question for a little later, but it's like, I'm kind of thinking about what, there's only in terms of write-off, not for accounts receivable that's never claimed. Is this going to impact that? Is that what we're assuming to a certain extent?
We'd be hoping to improve it.
Yeah.
So let me just speak to that directly, and I'll be very quick. We've seen that with by aggressively pursuing the COVID relief for the customers, we actually saw that come down. So when we entered the biennial budget period, we increased our allowance for our bad debt expense substantially, and we haven't had to use that money because we've used these other monies instead. So there's a direct trade-off there. Yeah, and please proceed. I want to take.
I had a question about the line though. Is that the biannual, is that 2-year budget or?
No, it just needs to be shifted up.
Sometimes that shifted down. 75. Should be 250. It should be up here.
Should be between the 200 and the 300.
So the whole point of this, it has been to kind of lead you through, if I wanted to say hours of minimum wage is going to be the metric I want to manage to, okay, what level do I want to manage to? 4.8, maybe 4, maybe some other number. That's going to give us the amount of assistance that we're going to need per qualified customer. Then how many customers are going to qualify? How are we going to set that number? We need to come up with that. What's the participation level that we expect to get for that number of qualified customers? And then from that, we can come up with how much program funding do we think we need to have in order to provide that level of assistance. When we come together next month, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we'll also talk about those different kinds of programs, which we kind of introduced at the kickoff meeting, that might best deliver those benefits. So we talked about discount programs. We talked about fixture replacements. We talked about different kinds of things, emergency assistance and flexible payment programs. These each have different features associated with them that can deliver these program benefits, either more along the lines of what you're thinking or maybe even less, but we can look at different facets of those things. We're always gonna have to come back to this. So one of the things that the district needs to hear is how much of our revenue do we need to set aside to provide this assistance? The other thing we'll talk about next month too is depending on where you decide this needs to be set, what's the impact of that going to be on everyone else? All of those who aren't qualifying for this, there is going to be a need to fund this program, and it's going to have some impact on rates. And so we want to be able to give you some metrics there that will help you gauge that. For example, for every, let's say $100,000 in annual benefits, it's going to have this much effect percentage-wise on everyone's bills, whatever that happens to be. And we'll figure that out for you and present it to you next time.
Can I just try to understand the chart here?
Sure.
On the where the line where you got it wrong, where it should be higher, it should be 250. How are you, what's the logic that you step through to have that, that function that it goes up that amount to serve these levels? Is that based upon your cost of staffing it, or what are those costs?
This is just the bill assistance.
The bill assistance.
Yeah.
So how much is it going to cost?
How much is it going to cost for every customer that we provide the assistance to? We started there.
Okay.
Remember that? So that was this. That's monthly. How much assistance needs to be provided per qualified customer? And then we talked about how many customers are we talking about? Right. Depends on how we want to look at it, right? So here we just gave a couple of ideas. If we're talking about the federal poverty level, maybe it's somewhere in this range. If we're talking about everyone in the lowest quintile, in terms of single family customers, at least, it's maybe in this range. And then we talked about how many would participate. So it's kind of A times B times C is going to get you to this, and then you multiply it all out into an annual number, and you're going to come up with the total funding need for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just add that if we wanted to get to these higher participation rates, we know we would have to add additional staffing or somehow get additional staffing to an entity that could actually push that to make it happen. We don't have the staffing today to help us get there.
And those numbers aren't included here. We haven't even gotten to that.
What's the annual revenue budget for the district?
75 million.
75 million. Okay.
Ish. Depends on the West.
Give it 7,000, so 1%.
So I was just wondering, how do you justify your argument when a customer can't decide which part of their bill they're paying, water supply or sewage? Like, they get a bill for $200, they can't say, I'll give you $100 for TVWD, but I'm not paying for the other services. How do you, they're kind of stuck.
Well,
The bill's $200. The bill's $200, and they can't say, well, we're only paying Paul. We're not going to put folks out in Hillsborough with Clean Water Services.
yeah, let's quickly pivot back. So we have an intergovernmental agreement with Clean Water Services, and we can talk about the reasons that we do that. It saves our customers a lot of money by sending out one bill and all that. But that intergovernmental agreement says that when we receive $1 in or $100 or $200, how it gets applied against the bill. So we can't sort of pay one bill and not the other because of the agreement that we have with Clean Water Services. But we can talk about this offline maybe.
Jason, do you want
Cost
to
of switch to-
summarize?
Yeah, I just need to wrap up.
Got some water?
Okay.
I think it's been pointed out, and I do, and it's totally fair. A lot of what we just looked at, these examples includes some pretty wide-reaching assumptions, but I've got to tell you that that's going to be part of your decision-making. Nobody's going to be able to give you something super precise that's going to tell you, here's what it needs to be. So what Manny said is, if I had a stone tablet that I could share with you, I would. We're going to have to make some reasonable decisions about what these ranges look like. And we have to also know that when we're doing that, that the only certainty about it all is that we're wrong. You know, we're going to get it wrong. You're going to get it wrong, but you're still going to come up with a really good idea that you can give to the district, and it's going to be okay. You know, nobody's going to come and hang you for the lack of your analysis here. We're going to give you the best that's available for you. For next time, types of programs, how to deliver the benefits to those that you want to recommend it for, impacts on customers' bills, what's the program size, what does it mean for the future bills? How much is that, what's that trade-off? And your thoughts. We talk a lot more about that. What is it you want to do? What more do we need to help you with in order to get you to where you need to go? We're not quite there yet. You know, we got some more to step through, but we're here to help you. So between myself and the members of TVWD staff, we can get you as much information as we have available, but please keep in mind, the precision here is not great. We're just going to try to bracket these things for you with the best information we have available.
Todd, it sounds like you might have some information that you can share with us tonight about ideas for those numbers.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, as you said, a lot of assumptions are already built in there. So, you know, you did 5 steps of calculations. It started with a pretty big assumption. So I think that it is, you know, worth looking at how many customers are we actually starting with that would qualify for such a program. And then definitely, I think that this committee can put its head together about how participation rates can be as high as possible. I don't know if you guys are familiar with PGE is doing an income qualified bill discount, similar program. They're doing self-certification that's backed up with an audit of 3% of the, you know, the folks as a way to check for fraud. You know, it doesn't appear that fraud is rampant in any sort of way. So, you know, allowing for self-certification, allowing for other forms of qualification of people who receive other forms of assistance. That way you can get participation rates up, definitely administrative costs down. So there's a lot for this committee to chew on in terms of making something like this work and, you know, work for the people that need it best.
I know it's after 8, now twice in a row, I've gone past 8 o'clock with you guys, and I promised you we wouldn't, but I think it was worth it so much to have you here today, Manny, and Jason, getting us prepared for our next assignment next month. And I know we're out of time, but the question just is, do we agree that there's a problem and TVWD should explore options for an expanded customer service program? And if you want to think about it some more and we do a raise of hands on this next month, I would totally understand. Or if you feel comfortable with it, you could put your hand up and say, yes, let's explore it. That is
One question that I maybe missed or
Sure.
point. So out of 11,000, we use the 11,200 available single-family people who might be eligible for this by this definition. How many people currently are participating in the district? Is it 1,000 people,
Well, there's
1,000?
one thing I want to
I may have missed that
Yeah.
fact,
I
so.
think somebody can answer your question, but I want to clarify what Jason was showing wasn't the numbers they're proposing to use. He just found some numbers.
So that's not for the
Example.
district then?
No, those numbers are for the district, but his qualifiers, he was using just examples.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'm totally okay with that. So it's just a.
Okay, question.
Yeah, why don't we come back next month with the answer to that question in a graphic form, and I can get you the real numbers as opposed to trying to do it off the top of my head.
Okay,
And maybe I can con her into sending it out in advance somehow.
yeah.
You can probably talk me into it, yeah. So how do you guys feel? Go forth and consider a program? Yay?
What's the difference between 1 and 2?
Yes.
Well, if you wanted to say, oh, I agree with some modification to that statement.
Oh, modification.
You wanted to,
statement.
yeah, I was, yes.
Oh, agree.
Agree, okay, all right, yeah. Okay, that's good. The committee before you came to this point and they said it doesn't really look like there's a need for more of an affordability program, maybe in the future. So this really is the first question to answer. Do you see a need to explore a program? Anyway, thank you very much. We're now 7 minutes over time. I apologize for that, but thank you so much.